one of the things that I've been thinking about is needing to believe you can do something before you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically in the context of waking up, I think we've talked about this before. But when kind of observing myself, I can see there is some, and I think I've noticed this in the course of this work. At the beginning, there's the idea of waking up or enlightenment, or was kind of like a far-fetched idea.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, I'd be listening to the Buddhists say, like, you're going to try to reach enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. And it was just kind of like, I can't really understand it. And then slowly I'm kind of just like being like, okay, well, like, what if I can? What if it's possible? Like, what if, and then part of it is not knowing or understanding what it is exactly either. But I've noticed this with other things in my work, or in the area of work, like when somebody, say with like AI, somebody develops a new AI, and all of a sudden everybody else develops it as well, because they realize, no, it is possible, and then that just unblocks them. And so I guess my question is, like, what can one do that can help them, like, believe that they can wake up?
Okay. Well, there's several parts to what you said. One of them was the faith that you can do it. That would be like learning to swim, or learning to drive, or learning to ride a bicycle. You have to believe that you can do it in order to do it. So that's important. Mm-hmm. The second one was this aspiration that the Mahayana Buddhists in particular have to obtain enlightenment for the benefit of all sentient beings. That it is done in the service not just of one individual ego, but in the service of all sentient beings, to alleviate suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And then the third point, you said it was something like, oh yeah, it was about, yeah. So the third point would be the methodology of that. How does that make sense? How does one getting enlightened help other sentient beings? So of those three questions, where would you like me to focus?
Let's start with the faith.
Okay, so this is, as you know, I don't like to use the word faith because reason will work just as well. But there is a certain necessity to believe that you can do it. And the example I use oftentimes is a mountain climber, who's trying to get to the top of El Capitan. If she doesn't think she can do it, she won't do it. But if she believes she can do it, and she knows other people have done it before her, then she most certainly can do it. And now she just needs to get her equipment together and get her mind together and do some training and scale that height. So there's nothing mystical about that. That's true of any big endeavor, serious endeavor. You got to believe that you can do it, right? If you're going to start a startup, you got to believe that you can be successful, or you're not going to be successful. That's the first prerequisite. And people leave that out, or they let that kind of lack of belief in themselves sabotage them. So it's a very critical point that you bring up, and one that's not addressed in the literature as much as it should be. I think it's more of a problem these days with our modern technological society, but in any case, one must believe that it can be done. And then one must believe that one can do it. And that's hard, I know, because when I was in med school, I remember picking up a book. It was Tales of the Dervishes. I was buying books for med school, anatomy books and biochemistry books and things. It was on on a card table outside of the quad. And there, with all these used books, here was this book, Tales of the Dervishes, and I looked at it, and I remember feeling very wistful about it. And I remember the thought that I had in my head. It was like, oh, well, that's not for me.
Mm.
And it was a kind of bittersweet feeling. It was mitigated somewhat by that. I was going to be starting med school, so it's not for me, but I was going to be a physician.
Mm.
But I remember very distinctly that feeling of wistfulness and missing out.
What does wistful mean?
Why don't you look at it real quick? Because I'm afraid that my use of it may be different than current use. Wistful.
Wistful, Merriam-Webster says, full of yearning or desire tinged with melancholy.
There you go. Tinged with melancholy. I wished I could do it, but I knew I couldn't, so I was wistful. There was the melancholy of knowing that I was going to miss out on all that.
Mm.
But maybe 15 years later, I'll be damned if the book wasn't specifically prescribed for me, which changed everything. That was a nice circumstance. Then that book got prescribed for me, and that was part of changing my life. So things work mysteriously. But that feeling of wistfulness, not this lifetime, or I can't do that because I've got to go work in the garage, or I got to go work at the tech company, or I got to go clean houses or whatever. Well, you shouldn't let that get in your way, because what we're talking about is something that everyone already has. We're not going to add something to anyone. We're simply going to uncover what's already there. And so everyone, literally everyone, and every sentient creature has Zen within them. They have the Nagual, they have God, they have consciousness with a big C. It's the way things are. And so it's not, the achievement is getting out of your own way, not adding something to yourself.
Right. So when in the past I had I had the idea that in order to wake up you'd have to go and live in a monastery for
correct yes while, and
right?
That's a big misconception,
right? And so the books I've been reading has cleared that up at this point.
Correct. But think how many people don't know that. That's part of the rationale for this channel. It's so people can know, no, you don't have to become a monk. You don't have to shave your head and go around with a begging bowl or sit there in a zendo with a bunch of New Age people. It's not like that at all. It's not like that at all. There's nothing New Age about it, frankly. I mean, if you're New Age, that's fine. If you're not New Age, that's fine. It's everybody's inherent possession. That's who they are.
Right.
So nothing could be further from the truth. And, you can see how this happened because the monks were the ones that wrote the books and the ones that got all the attention in the public eye. And they were the ones going around begging for money with their bowls, back in India or China or whatever. Or they were the ones who, the monks got all the attention, but the real work was done by other folks, oftentimes. Right. Now, we may need to go back to something like monasteries if the society collapses, right? But that's a different situation.
Right. But yeah, so I guess I can see now that okay, this is something I can do in the context of my life. There's no major, I don't have to go off to India or whatever.
No, you shouldn't.
But that's clear to me now. But there's still this limiting. There's this limit of I don't know if I can do it, or I don't know how to do it, or you know what I mean?
Well, those are two different things. You don't know if you can do it. it's going to happen anyway when you die.
Mm.
And sometimes people get lucky, they have a near-death experience, or they have some other major trauma or something like that, and it just shakes them out of their egoic mindset, and they wake up. But for the rest of us, yeah, it takes some doing to get to know your own mind. And there's a lot of side benefits to knowing your own mind. You suffer much less, and you make other people suffer less. When you realize that your mind is a construct that's been handed to you since you were a little kid, and that it's been molded by the culture, the society that you grow up in, and you realize that that society and that culture is not all it cracked up to be. As a matter of fact, there's much that is pathogenic in it. Do you know what pathogenic means? Causes pathology, causes disease.
I see.
So when you realize that a lot of your suffering and a lot of your confusion, I'm saying you, but I mean one's suffering and confusion is due to their mind, then the way I look at it, a reasonable person says, well, what can I do to make this better? Because this is my one and only life. And it's very precious, whether people recognize it or not. And so then oftentimes the motivation for people, and it is that they want to feel better in life, and they want to be more constructive, creative, and spend less time in self-defeating thought patterns or self-defeating behaviors or immature coping strategies that are ultimately don't work. That's why we have such an industry of coaches and therapists and all this. So no one's suggesting anything more than understanding your mind completely and thoroughly.
Right.
I'm tempted to say something, but I don't know if I should. But even if one does not wake up suddenly, one's life is improved radically during the process of gradual awakening, gradual clarity. So for those reasons alone, I think it makes sense for many people to say, hey, well, look, nobody else is going to do this for me. This has to be done for me. And it's part of growing up.
Right.
And so one learns to self-regulate, and hopefully one learns to master their mind rather than being a slave to their mind and the torture that the mind can inflict. So, no one can give you motivation. And it is true that you do need to be motivated. The dedication of intent is a central feature of every tradition, psychological and spiritual, if it's going to work. And so no one can give that to you. Is there something in particular that's troubling you? I mean, you could speak for every man, and I'll speak to every man.
So one thing that I wonder that I feel like it's a difficulty is not seeing a lot of examples, or if there are examples, oftentimes they're from books, and so they have like a almost fictitious feeling to them, and so not having.
Okay. That's a legitimate point. We live in an extremely degenerate time. We live in a time that we basically have worshipped at the altar of materialist science for several hundred years. We've said that anybody that has, and especially in academia, anybody who has even a religious thought, something's wrong with them, and they're weak-minded and they're to be shunned. You can't even bring up matters of the spirit in many universities. You'll be laughed out of town, and worse, you won't get a promotion. And so it's been extremely degenerate what's happened, and now we're paying the price for that. Man does not live on bare bread or tech alone, right? So what you're saying is absolutely true. Now the effect of that is to drive everybody underground. I didn't start teaching publicly till I was 70, because it'll destroy your career. it's not that's not the total reason. The other reasons was I needed at least 30 years to digest what I'd been given, right? Because I'm kind of slow, or something. And the other thing is, a lot of people don't teach because they figure if someone's going to be motivated, they'll be self-motivated. And there's plenty of materials for someone who's authentically interested. So most people who wake up don't teach at all. And then,
Right.
of course, then we have the problem of some people who haven't woken up teaching because they think it's a good way to make a living, but they're frauds. And so, but that's been a problem since the beginning. And the Zen literature in the 11th century complains about this. So I guess I want to empathize. I can understand how you feel. On the other hand, being a human being, I can say, I hope that you are as fortunate as I was, because I was very, very fortunate. I shouldn't say I didn't start teaching till I was 70. I didn't start teaching Dharma till I was 70. I taught all kinds of other things, child development and judicial, education, things like that. But our culture will not allow you to speak the way I can speak now that I'm an old man. It's maybe
Right.
changing because people are getting desperate. And there's quite a bit of intolerance, frankly, on the side of the churches too, right? You have to be within a certain doctrine, and if you're not, then you're no good, or you're bad, or whatever. You're not the true faith. If you don't believe the Bible literally in a certain way, then you're not really a true Christian or something like that. Or the same thing with the Quran. And so, for these reasons, it's been a very particularly tragic time for young people, especially because this belongs to them. Many people spent lifetimes preparing materials and recording them for us. And it would be a terrible fate for humanity if we lost all this in our insanity. So I don't know if that helps, but that's my perspective on that situation. And I would say just keep an open mind and open heart and see what happens. Things have a way of happening if you have an open mind.
Right.
The way has its ways. As long as you're an authentic person, an authentic human being. I mean, it has no place for liars and cheats and mountebanks and people with closed hearts.
Yep.
Okay. Do you want to go? You want to follow up on that?
Yeah. So, on that topic, the other thing that I noticed that I think is a limiting thing, is like fear. There's fear of the unknown, but there's also kind of fear of just like power or something.
Yeah. And fear of death.
Yeah.
Well, if I might circle back to the third section of your first set of questions, this is where the aspiration for the enlightenment, for the aspiration for the welfare of all sentient beings comes in. Because if you're working for yourself, then the unknown becomes scarier. The idea of death may be paralyzing, because at the bottom there's probably a fear of death. But if you're working for the welfare of suffering sentient beings, then all of that gets diluted and it gets transformed into something else, something that gets transformed into love. And I can't imagine being afraid of love and compassion. Right. And so this is the genius of the Mahayana Buddhists, right? And the older I get, the more I can see the wisdom in that altruism. And also, there's a book I may have mentioned before called Adaptation to Life, where they talk about the defense strategies, the coping strategies. starting with the most primitive ones, psychotic denial and projection and splitting and things like that. But then going up to the very top defense mechanisms or coping strategies, and those are altruism and sublimation, artistic or creative sublimation, and humor and things like that. But altruism is compassion. And so, but it's real compassion. It's not sentimental compassion. And so, I think the way if it works, and I don't see why it wouldn't. It's worked for thousands of years. The dedication of this energy, this intent, the power that arises is for the welfare of all sentient beings, and then the fear is not an issue, or not nearly as much of an issue, because you're not doing it for yourself. Also, you have guides,
Yeah.
And there our history is full of these guides, but we in the West have suppressed them. In every tradition, from Islam to Christianity and Taoism and everything else. So we threw out the baby with the bathwater.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
follow up.
No follow up there.
Okay.
One second. I've been reading Moon Dreams.
Moon Dreams.
So,
by whom? Written when? For whom?
Or was it Moon Conversations?
Oh, Dream Conversations.
Dream Conversations.
Oh yeah, this is a good book. This is a very nice book. And for everybody out there who's worried about reading a book, this is barely a magazine. Go ahead.
It is very good. There's a couple passages that
Oh, if you're going to say it's good, I'm going to advertise it some more. Dream Conversations on Buddhism and Zen. Muso Kokushi. It's very accessible, which is nice.
Yeah.
Okay. Lucky you, I'm reading the Wuhan Cover-Up. Oh my God. Don't read that unless you want to have nightmares. Mm-hmm. It's a history of bioweapons research in the 20th century. Oh my God. Okay, so Dream Conversations. Question from here?
Yeah, there's one. Let me see. There's a passage. One second, let me grab the book to make sure I have it right.
Okay, I'll do an ad for it. It's a 94-page book. These are passages selected by Thomas Clary to be accessible, and they're a great introduction to Zen, about which there is much misunderstanding and about which there is much to recommend. Zen really cuts to the heart of the matter, and there's all kinds of different weird attitudes about Zen, but at its essence, it's really quite extraordinary. Unfortunately, it does attract frauds and fakes because they can confuse the befuddled. And so you have to be careful that you get an authentic Zen teacher and not somebody who's just trying to confuse you. Okay, sir?
Yeah, so there's this one passage.
One passage.
I'll read it. It's called Possession.
What page?
9.
Okay.
Should I read it?
Yes, please do.
Okay. It says, people who undertake spiritual exercises with a sense of acquisitiveness, even with regard to spiritual states, are really doing the work of demons, even if they feel they are being spiritual. Those who seek knowledge and extraordinary power for the sake of personal gain and fame are also doing the work of demons. When people are possessed by such inner demons, they may become receptors of external forces that artificially boost their intellectual or psychic powers for a time. Not realizing that it is a false and deceptive condition, such people attribute this to themselves and become all the more conceited and possessed by their demons.
Yeah, it's a form of Zen sickness. Yeah, very good.
So my question is, what are the external forces that artificially boost their intellectual or psychic powers?
Very good question.
And how
let me read it. Let me read it also for folks because I think it's good. People who undertake spiritual exercises with a sense of acquisitiveness, even with regard to spiritual states, are really doing the work of demons, even if they feel they are being spiritual. Those who seek knowledge and extraordinary powers for the sake of personal gain and fame are also doing the work of demons. When people are possessed by such inner demons, they may become receptors of external forces that artificially boost their intellectual or psychic powers for a time. Not realizing it is a false and deceptive condition, such people attribute this to themselves and become all the more conceited and possessed by their demons. Excellent. Yeah, so early on, you can you acquire more power in the world and intrapsychically, etc. But notice he says that, so there's inner demons.
Mm-hmm.
So the inner demons kind of match up with the external demons. And if we look at, let me be very concrete about it.
Mm-hmm.
You have an inner demon that wants to inflate your importance in the eyes of others, right? Mm-hmm. And you're unaware that this is a demon. And so now you start meditating and clarifying and breathing and your mind's getting clearer and you start to get more and more power. Mm-hmm. Now, your inner demons are there just waiting for an outer demon. Like some charlatan comes along and says, hey, I've got a great way to make money, but it's really a Ponzi scheme, right? Mm-hmm. Or it's some kind of, fly-by-night, snake oil salesman, or it's a tech company that's really trying to defraud people or whatever. But it's a way to get rich quick and a way to get famous quick. I mean, you can think of a biotech CEO who fell for that kind of stuff recently, right? A female.
Yeah.
Right? So what happened was her inner demons, her inner weaknesses matched up with outer demons of power and greed and fame and notoriety and all this, and it all comes crashing down because it's all built on a fraud. But had she not had that initial, if somebody had not been watering or feeding her inner demon, she wouldn't have been as susceptible to that external force. And I'm going to leave it at that for now, but as you go deeper into this work, there's much more, of course. Mm-hmm. So the key there is that when your mind comes alive, the whole thing comes alive, and that it means that the demons are also going to get some water and some vitamins, mm-hmm. making them much more receptive to their external counterparts. Something like that. Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay, good. That's good. I'm glad you had that in there. That's good.
Yeah, that's interesting. How do you distinguish between like the real power that you gain from this work versus?
Well, in my case, I learned a lot from mistakes, unfortunately. But generally, you have a guide, someone to help you along, a teacher, a guide, a coach, a trusted parent or something, somebody who can see you more objectively that you trust. Okay? Something mm-hmm. like that. And also you pray for guidance and you're sincere. Mm. And then again, mm-hmm. see, that's another reason why this altruistic route, remember it's compassion and wisdom, you need both. Compassion and mm-hmm. insight. If you only have one, you're not gonna fly. You're gonna fall over. And so, with the insight, that's tempered by compassion, right? And you realize, well, hey, I can't be doing this. I'm taking advantage of other people. That's wrong. I mean, would I want that? You know the drill.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and then hopefully you're in a culture that also discourages that, and you're not in a culture that encourages that. But unfortunately, in our culture, we're very, very confused at the moment, and we have been for a while. So that's why people need to protect themselves and nourish their inner selves also. Okay, sir?
Yeah. On that topic, I feel like greed is an inner demon that I deal with sometimes, but I have a hard time because in the context of like making money, like you need to make money, you need to make a living, right? And right now times feel kind of like uncertain and stuff, and so there's a desire to make more money to have more security, say.
Yeah, as long as the money stays intact.
Yeah, and like, you know, how, like if I want to buy a house and eventually have a family, houses are really expensive right now, and so if I want to do that, I need to make a lot of money. And
so is it greedy to want? Is it greedy to want your own house? I don't think so. I mean, but see, so now we have to look at, so this is another problem. We have zero-sum thinking embedded deeply in our culture, not realizing that we can grow the entire economy and everyone can prosper, but we have to grow to do that. Now, so to grow efficiency and technology and food and things like this, make buildings and have an economy that's growing, people don't understand that is the solution, not fighting over the little crumbs of bread that are left. And so many of our problems come from that misunderstanding. So if you're contributing to society and you're doing something of value, then I wouldn't call that greed. I'd call that, you know, just trying to make things better for everybody, if that's what you're doing. Now, if you're trying to extract things without contributing anything, in my personal opinion, I think that's a shabby life. People who don't contribute, who just extract from other people's labor or other people's creation. And you know who those are. And it's just a shabby life, and it's a hard life. And I know it because I worked as a shrink all my life, and these people would come into me very wealthy and very desperate for meaning, and very desperate for purpose, and very empty inside and not knowing what was wrong. And so this is a real disease of our time. But I don't think wanting a house... Now, if nobody has a house and no one's got enough energy to build a house, then maybe it's greedy. I don't know, but why not build more houses, right? That's the way I would see that. Right. But yes, we're in a culture that is known for its greed and its rapaciousness, right? Mm-hmm. And that's going to wear off on us.
That makes sense. But then it's easy to like be like, well, I want a bigger house, or I want a bigger car.
Well, then you'll pay the price for that yourself. In the Tao Te Ching, this extraordinary book of wisdom, what you'll learn as you get older is that the more things you have, the more problems you have. And the bigger the things you have, the bigger your problems with them. And so some people have to get really old before they realize that, and some people never grow up. But most adults, when they grow up, they realize, you know, the more things I have, the more problems I have.
Yeah.
So that takes care of itself if you're paying attention. And then people long for the simple life where they don't have, you know, all these problems that go along with having too many things.
Yeah.
Right? But the Taoists, I mean, they've been talking about that for 2,500 years, longer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Makes sense.
So simplify. To have a simple life is, sooner or later, that's what everyone wants anyway.
Yeah.
Next question. Or are we still on that one?
Um, well, you said to have a simple life that's what people want. Um, but in my own experience, I feel like I had that idea that I just need to keep things really simple. But then I feel like I had like potential for growth that I wasn't paying attention to because I just wanted to be simple. So
Growth of what?
um like um I guess in my career,
Okay.
for example, right? I think I've seen this mindset a lot of like, oh well, I don't need a house, I just need a tiny apartment because we need to save the environment, and I don't need a car, and I'm just gonna do nothing to be simple. And
Is that
it
your
does it,
nature?
it
Is that your nature? Or is your nature more creative and energetic?
I mean, personally, it's more creative. Yeah.
So why would you deny that?
Right.
I mean, people have different temperaments, and what's simple for one is ridiculously complex for another.
Mm.
For some people, looking at the phone bill, the credit card bill, the insurance bill, and the tax bill, they look at the tax forms and their eyes go crossed and they go, "Good God, this is horrible! This is horrible torture."
Yeah. I mean, it is. I think for most people.
Okay, so everything's a matter of degree.
Yeah.
I think that'll work itself out. Just don't go crazy. The middle way, right? Don't go crazy in any direction. And if you're in Rome, it's okay to do as the Romans do, but keep your head about you.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're in Silicon Valley, that's different than if you're in the Midwest somewhere living on a farm. It's two different situations, and the best would be able to adapt to either one. And that's when when you've mastered your mind and you've mastered yourself, then you can do that, and you will do that.
Makes sense.
It's hilarious for me because I remember when I was young, there was some kid who was, I don't know, he was hooked up with these hedge fund guys or something. No, he was hooked up with a bank, and they would bring companies public. And every time they brought a company public, they would make millions and millions and millions of dollars. This is way back when. I'm scratching my head going, how does this kid, man, how does he manage to make all this money? And I went to med school and all this stuff. This guy is like crazy rich, and he just, he's a friend of a close friend. And he was a smart guy, and so he quit it all. And what he did with his money, he went and bought a ranch, just like the one I grew up on. Where we're close to the ground or whatever, but with all that money and all that stuff, he went and creates the same situation as what I had growing up, so I thought that was hilarious. It's like watching people drink Corona beer in Bohemia and those Mexican beers that no one would drink back in the day, because they were Mexican and they were, people are funny. Okay, next question. Next question, sir. Pardon me.
1 second. I have another one from Dream Conversations.
Yeah, I love questions from here.
I wrote it down, but I'm trying to find where it is in the book. Give me 1 second.
Here, I'm going to read, while you're looking, I'm going to just read a quote I have highlighted here. Nagarjuna said, quote, "To observe the impermanence of the world is temporarily called the aspiration for enlightenment." That's interesting. Because it is a practice for entering from the shallows to the depths, those in whom even this shallow aspiration for enlightenment does not arise cannot develop the true aspiration for enlightenment. This is why Zen teachers have always explained the principle of transience to their students, even though they point directly to the fundamental. Yeah, that's something else. That in Zen, it appears, if you read their books, it appears that, they're skipping over all the basics, emptiness and compassion and enlightenment for all sentient beings and altruism and all the good stuff, the good meat of Buddhism. But in fact, they're not. They're speaking to students who are so saturated with this culture that they don't have to talk about that, right? And so that's something I have to point out because it's not obvious to people in the beginning. But these Zen students, this is like an advanced Buddhism. They've already gotten the basics. Did you find it?
Yeah.
All right.
This is on page 13. Types of knowledge. There are various kinds of knowledge as defined in Buddhism. There is genuine knowledge and false knowledge, temporal knowledge and true knowledge. People often think of religious knowledge as understanding of doctrines. Conventional knowledge or ignorance, however, are not knowledge and ignorance in the true sense. It has been said that the path is not in knowledge or non-knowledge. Enlightenment is not merely a matter of intellectual understanding, nor yet of obliterating intellectual understanding and being empty and calm. A way to approach the fundamental knowledge is to set aside all such interpretations and focus intensive non-conceptual inquiry on the state where the setting aside has taken place.
Okay. Read the third sentence again. Slowly.
This part, it has been said that
people often think
of religious knowledge as understanding of doctrines.
Semicolon.
Conventional knowledge or ignorance, however, are not knowledge and ignorance in the true sense.
People often think of religious knowledge as understanding of doctrines. Conventional knowledge or ignorance, however, are not knowledge and ignorance in the true sense. Okay, keep going.
It has been said that the path is not in knowledge or non-knowledge.
Correct. Okay, what's the question?
So, first, a few things, just like clarification. What does it mean? Conventional knowledge or ignorance are not knowledge and ignorance in the true sense.
Okay, ask the question again slowly.
When it says conventional knowledge or ignorance are not knowledge and ignorance in the true sense, what
because it's knowledge about illusory things, right? Like, let's say, okay, so I have an example here. On the other hand, you could be used. All right, so let me think here. Let's say you're drawing Bugs Bunny cartoons, and you know that Bugs Bunny is supposed to be 2 inches tall, and who was the nemesis of Bugs Bunny? Oh, Elmer Fudd is supposed to be 3 inches tall, right? So that's knowledge. But then when you're going to project it onto the screen, Bugs Bunny is like, 5 feet tall, and Elmer Fudd is, 7 feet tall. Mm-hmm. So you have knowledge, but it's not true knowledge. Now if you go to another theater, we'll say one in Mexico, Bugs Bunny is like 3.5 feet tall, and Elmer Fudd is 6.5 feet tall, or something like that, because it's different size screen, different size projector. So you have knowledge, you have information and knowledge, but it's not. Really, that's not. It's of no account. It's of no lasting account. Or you could go into dreams. and you could have knowledge of all the details of a dream, but then when you wake up, it's knowledge about a dream, and the dream doesn't exist. Okay, now this world, as the Buddha pointed out, is Maya, it's illusion. So we have knowledge of the illusion, but that's not true knowledge, because it's of an illusory thing. It's like counting the rabbits that you see in a cloud. I mean, you know how many rabbits there are in the cloud, but that cloud is not really, they're not really rabbits, and the cloud's going to blow away. Do you remember the story of the... Okay, never mind, keep going. So what's the issue?
And then what does it mean to focus intensive non-conceptual inquiry on the state where the setting aside has taken place?
Now we're getting into real Zen. So the way that Zen works is that it's really interesting. How does it work? Master teachers are able to point to things in ways that don't make immediate sense, but then when you see them, they can just break open your mind. And the one that I wanted to use, if I can find it, you remember the story of the traveler and the ghosts? Do you remember that story? Traveler and the ghosts. Some guy was walking around along the road at night one night, and and was attacked by a ghost. And so the ghost was dragging his body around, and then they run into another ghost, and the two ghosts get in a fight because the first ghost said, this is my body. I found him over there. And the other ghost wants a piece of it, and they get in a fight, and they tear this guy apart. And the second ghost tears this guy into pieces, tears his arms off and his legs off and everything else. And then the first ghost patches him back together. But then the second ghost doesn't like that, and so they rip him apart again. They get in a big fight over who's going to get the most of this guy's body. And so they patch him up again. Now he's all patched up in all God knows what kind of way. They put arms where they put them, or legs wherever. They didn't care. And then they just get down to business. They just want to eat the body. And somehow or another, this guy's looking down on this, and he's wondering about his own body. And then he remembers, it's in one of these books, but he remembers his parents and how when he was first conceived, whose body was it? And so he came into this world with nothing except for mental consciousness. And he's going to leave the world with nothing but mental consciousness. But in the meanwhile, he went crazy thinking about his body, because was it his body? Was it not his body? And the story goes on, but by contemplating that, and it has many different elements to it. There's a certain shock value to it. There's a certain liveliness to it. There's a certain depth to it because of the contemplation of what you come into the world with. And so why do you call it yours? Why do you call it your body? At what point did it become your body? Would be a question, would be a Zen question. At what point did what you call your body become yours? And then if you say it's not yours, then how can you get it to do things? There's a lot like that in Zen. And so that's another kind of knowledge. That's Zen, that's skill and means is what that is. But I'm trying to find there's a particular story. This book isn't, here's one. Here's a good one. So it's not the one I was looking for, but this one will work. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Once there was a disciplinarian monk who had kept the precepts all his life. Okay, so he's a moral guy. Once there was a disciplinarian monk who had kept the precepts all his life. As he was walking one night, he stepped on something that squished, which he imagined to be a frog, a mother frog laden with eggs. Mortified at the thought of having killed a pregnant frog, when the monk went to sleep that night, he dreamed that hundreds of frogs came to him demanding his life. He was utterly terrified. Come morning, the monk went to look for the frog he had squashed and found that it had only been an overripe eggplant. At that moment, the monk's perplexities abruptly ceased, realizing that there is nothing concrete in the world. For the first time, he was really able to apply it practically in life. Now I ask you, when he stepped on it by night, was it a frog or an eggplant? If it was a frog, yet when he looked at dawn, it was an eggplant. If it was an eggplant, yet there were frogs demanding his life the night before. Can you decide? I'll try to decide for you. Feelings of frog may be shed, but the idea of eggplant remains. If you would be free of the idea of eggplant, strike the evening chime at noon. Just gorgeous. And just an entertaining story too. So this poor guy, like he's tortured all night because he stepped on a frog with all her eggs. You know, he's a conscientious guy, and it changed his life. But then he woke up and found out it wasn't an frog at all. It was an eggplant, but his life was still changed. So which was it? So that's Zen teaching, right? And so if you can understand that, if you can grok that fully, then you're starting to have some knowledge, some real knowledge, because what it points to is something very profound about the real and imagined worlds. And those are the reality we're embedded in, actually, not the material, Madonna's material world, material girl. No, that's not it, it turns out. And so, if he had knowledge of how many eggs the frog had, was that knowledge? True knowledge? And the question almost doesn't make sense.
Right.
Do you see what I'm saying? So does that help with that paragraph?
I think so.
Yeah, I mean, if you have, you can have endless knowledge about imaginary things, right?
What's that?
You can have endless knowledge about imaginary things. We could create a taxonomy of let's think, leprechauns. So we study leprechauns. We read every book there is on leprechauns, and we know every different kind of leprechaun. We know their habits. We know their this, that. We know everything about leprechauns. But wait a minute, is that knowledge at all? Do you see? And so in Zen, they want to point you to reality, to real knowledge. Okay? And when you're through with, I mean, so this is a good book for starting, and those are good questions too, by the way. Anything more? Okay, so let me just quote it one more time. A way to approach the fundamental knowledge is to set aside all such interpretations and focus intensive non-conceptual inquiry on the state where this setting aside has taken place. And I'll find the other Zen story that I think is really appropriate for folks right now. Some kid came from the mountains to a Zendo, to a Zen master, and he's greeted, and the Zen master says, well, look, something along the line, if answer this question and you can stay. And he said something along the lines of, when you came from the city to the mountains, and he said, no, where are you from? He says, I'm from the city. And where are you now? He says, I'm in the mountains. He said, so when you came from the city, when you left the city is minus you, your mind. But when you came here, your mind was added extra. And so, is that true or is that false? Or something along the line. You know, these guys are true masters, right? Is that so? Explain that to, and if when you understand that, the truth or the falsity of that, the city is minus you, the mountains are plus you, from before all of this happened. So if you can understand that, you can stay. And so you can't think of that necessarily in a conceptual way. I mean, our usual way of thinking. You have to think of it in another way. And this is what they've discovered over the centuries can lead to sudden awakening. And their specialty. Okay, sir? But Zen's not for everybody, but it's for some. It's gorgeous when you get there, It's, whew. And Dogen, ooh. Anything else, sir, before we stop?
That's all I have.
All right. Keep the faith. I think you can do it. And you're just saying that because part of you needs to say that. So, good. Take care.